everybody. We're back. This is volume 10 of the Grant and Connor's Power Hour. Today we're continuing our discussion on Quentin Tarantino. If you watch part 1, you could see our conversations on Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Jackie Brown, Kill Bill 1 and 2, and kind of Quentin Tarantino's origins in the film world. And in this video, we're going to talk about his next 5 films, as well as his upcoming supposed retirement film, The Movie Critic, along with other things that come to mind. So I guess, without any further ado, let's talk a bit about Death Proof, because that's kind of the next one on the docket. What were your thoughts on him and Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez's Grindhouse little movement, duology of films they started up, and of course, I guess a little bit maybe on the expanded universe like Machete and the upcoming Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I think it's a fun idea. Um, Kind of like an A for effort thing. Um, Admittedly, I'm not a big fan of Death Proof or Planet Terror. I don't think I don't think I would go so far as to say. I know some people think that Death Proof would is like I've heard people call it like his worst film, and I don't necessarily agree because I think that I don't like using the word worse. I think it implies that Death Proof is bad, and I don't think it's bad. It is not my favorite. Um, I wouldn't even say it's my least favorite, which we can get to eventually.
Yeah,
but
maybe we'll go into loose rankings
yeah,
at the end, but
I I think it's charming, um, but at the same time, um, I don't think I think this movie is trying to emulate a certain movie, like almost like a no budget feature, and to my knowledge, the I mean, it's not like it had like a massive budget, but it was like it wasn't small, so
right.
there
And
is like something there where it kind of comes off as not very genuine, but
yeah, and there's a lot of films like that out there. I mean, tons of examples like Sharknado trying to emulate the giant shark
yeah.
genre. That's kind of an underground film genre you can find on like Tubi and garbage. Um, I,
Mhm.
I think in a lot of ways, or movies that try too hard to kind of be a Friday night, midnight movie or something. And I think Death Proof falls into that category. Where Quentin Tarantino usually takes what he has, and he takes from these genres that typically don't have as large of a budget, and he uses the name Quentin Tarantino and the power that comes with that to make the biggest, most grandiose version of that type of movie possible. Where this one, he almost feels like he intentionally wanted it to feel a little cheap. Like you look at Kill Bill, and it's based on kind of those factory Shaw Brothers movies, or Bruce Lee movies, or a plethora of other films.
Yeah,
Pulp
I mean,
Fiction being
clearly
like
has
an 80s thriller, 70s, 80s thriller type, just done more modern with modern techniques and stuff. Where this film feels almost intentionally gimped and intentionally sort of in a realm where it's just, intentionally held back. And I don't know why Quentin Tarantino went that route. When typically he puts his modern spin and massive budget to the test with these genres. Like why try to emulate, I don't want to say lesser films, but films that had to use less. Like when you have unlimited resources, why are you intentionally trying to emulate something with less resources instead of lifting up that genre like you did with Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill and stuff like that.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, I would agree because I think I don't know. The thing is, like, there's like that clear '70s influence on a lot of his films, um, but there's also this like contemporary like charm to it. Like aside from Jackie Brown, feeling like genuinely like a movie that could have been made in the 1970s, um, the rest of his films, you know, don't have that quality as much because it's just seeing that kind of time period and that style and that approach to filmmaking as like an influence and not as like a direct means of like emulation. Um,
Right.
there's still that contemporary feel that is in this movie um, when it switches halfway, which I mean I know people criticize the film for like its structure. Um, and I guess I'm sort of curious about your thoughts on it because I
Yeah.
definitely have like a strong feeling on it. But
I
I'm always curious to hear people's take on this movie.
I might be in the small percentile that doesn't really mind the change because I know what they're going for. It almost has like an essence of something like it almost feels like the grindhouse version of Psycho. Perhaps not as masterfully done, but I don't mind when the movies kind of rug pull who you think are the characters we're supposed to relate to and get used to, and you kind of rug pull it and you throw in a
Yeah,
new set of characters in a similar situation. Kurt Russell's character is kind of this film's equivalent of like a Norman Bates or a Jason Voorhees. He
yeah,
almost comes off as like a comical, like car wielding slasher villain, which I think is interesting. Um,
yeah, and I think that's the intent for sure. Is to like
yeah,
kind of create a slasher
for
type
sure.
movie. I mean,
And,
aside from like just like the
and I might
some of
be
the
one of the
story.
kind of few people that buy into that concept, and I understand why people don't buy into that concept, and I don't think it's a criticism like you didn't understand this piece of media, like it's a completely valid reason not to like the movie, but it kind of works for me. I think I don't want to go with this is Quentin Tarantino's worst film. I do probably rank it towards the bottom of my Tarantino rankings. I'm gonna have to pull those out of my ass when we come to that point in the video. But yeah, I definitely like. I don't know. I feel like the characters, especially in the first half, are more like archetypal, like sort of in that slasher and grindhouse vein. So I understand Quentin Tarantino's intent with the film, and I buy into his intent. I just still think it's a comparatively weak film when put up against the rest of his towering filmography. So,
Yeah, I mean,
what's your take
for me,
on the twist and all that?
I I I kind of like it. I think it's fun. I think really, I mean, aside from Psycho, there's a lot of movies that I can think of that kind of have this kind of approach to the structure, which I think is kind of fun um, because it is just so. There is almost like a challenging aspect to it of like of um, I have I mean you and I both came up uh, in the time of like YouTube critics were kind of like following like the CinemaSins route of like looking at films logically and objectively, and I've spent a lot of time kind of unlearning that because um, I think filmmaking is an art and it is subjective, um, and there is to a certain point you do have to meet a movie on its own terms and engage with it that way, and I've found it to be much more not only much more enjoyable, but much more like stimulating to watch movies that way, because it is much more like interesting to try and see see the movie through the filmmaker's eyes, and I think that this it's funny because I don't think Quentin Tarantino is a very challenging filmmaker. He's very accessible,
Oh yeah.
um, and that's part of the appeal. But I do think that if I were to describe one of his movies as challenging, this would be the one, because it is kind of asking not a lot per se, but in terms of a Quentin Tarantino movie, it is asking a lot of its audience, and I think I think the movie's reputation has changed over time, where people have kind of changed their minds and been like,
Right.
yeah, it's not as bad as I remember, or it's I kind of like this stuff, and I find that very fulfilling because I guess I'm glad that I'm not the only one because I remember watching this movie for the first time and being genuinely disappointed,
Right.
where I just didn't connect with it at all. Um, and
Well,
watching it again
I didn't even
later.
see this film until maybe 10 months ago. This is the last Quentin Tarantino movie, and I kind of put it off because of its reputation. Like I figured I might somewhat enjoy it based on uh kind of I can buy into the concept. I already had the twist spoiled for me and all that. But this is the last film of his that I got around to seeing, and while I will attest to it not being great, I know a lot of people, or maybe not attest to it not being great. I'll attest that it's on the lower sector of my ratings. I still think it's a pretty decent movie. I don't think it's a bad movie like some people say.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I
but
like it
I
quite a bit.
understand how things like the twist can be considered off-putting to certain audience members. So, yeah, well, I'm not surprised that's the outcome. I personally don't share the um, disdain that some people have for Death Proof.
Mm. Yeah, I think we're both in the same camp with it. I there's part of me that does think that the especially in the first half with Jungle Julia and her friends, I find the first half kind of charming in a way with like the cinematography and the sound kind of being a little shitty, and it's got this kind of like fried look to it, like it's like a film almost lost to time.
Right.
Um, and there is part of that, or like I know there's a couple parts of like skipped frames, or like a lot of jumping around. There's some parts where it looks like separate takes were
Right.
cut in, and that's charming. Until I remember that this movie is like a mid-budget thing. But I think, to be fair, a lot of that is more towards the second half is what a lot
Right.
of that is going for. Um, and part of me wishes that it would continue that kind of aesthetic all the way through. Because after the midpoint, the car crash and Michael Parks' character,
Right.
talking, the detectives talking about the crash in the hospital, and then it switches to Zoe Bell and her crew.
See, there's not like a particularly huge time skip either. If it was like this part takes place in the 70s, so it's kind of a 70s thing, and then you have like a more gritty, like talking about slashers. I almost wish when it switched, it had like almost a feel of like those slasher remakes where they're just almost a little too clean, like Last House on the Left versus the modern Last House on the Left type of feel. I would almost like something like that, where maybe now like an old man Kurt Russell is, maybe replace Kurt Russell or age him up or something somehow. But I would almost prefer like a time skip, like this is how we're seeing it, and maybe it could be a meta commentary on the ever prevalent horror remakes of the time. just a thought, because it kind of switches over, and it's sort of unnecessary. Like, either just keep the grain and the style throughout and make it like a reverent movie based on these low budget 70s films, or quick, you know, shot in a week film style,
Yeah.
or don't, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is trying to make a comment or some sort of commentary on films of that time, especially in the first half with like the women characters talk to each other, and there's this kind of like voyeuristic, like kind of uh, my like not really seeing these characters. I mean, the movie itself is like showing us through the dialogue and whatnot that these characters are like real, but um, from like a visual standpoint, it is very kind of just viewing women as objects kind of thing. And I feel like there is kind of a juxtaposition, especially with the second half, where there is a lot of effort put into um, Zoe Bell's story with the um, her attitude of like wanting to drive the model of the car, and there's the I'm blanking on the what's his name, but the other uh, the other stunt singer whose name I'm blanking on, but there is a lot to their characters, again through the
Right.
dialogue, but also in the way the camera um, is capturing them. It's not this voyeuristic kind of look. It's they're shown as very confident, very, and not in like the way that the characters in the first half are. Where like Jungle Julia is like a little kind of full of herself, and she's kind of shitty to her friends, where she sets her friend up as like this thing of like you know some I'm gonna have I tell my friends or I tell my listeners to come up to you and give this bullshit kind of line to her, and the first person she does it to, she has to give him a lap dance kind of thing. There is this like mutual respect that the second group all have for each other, as opposed to the first half.
Right.
And I feel like there is definitely kind of this means of because I mean visually it is a different look to it, and I think it is some commentary of like we're in the present, we're in the future, the past is the past, and that is done and outdated, and look at what happens to people like that, because in the present or the future, part um, our main protagonist, I mean, they succeed.
Yeah, the present day protagonists are also a lot more proactive. We talked a bit about kind of the strong women archetype. I think this falls into it's kind of interesting, because we talked about how both there's kind of the damsel in distress, weak women archetype, and then the strong women archetype, and how Quentin Tarantino often finds a better balance than going one way or the other. And I think this movie might have a little commentary on both. Obviously, leaning in favor of the strong women archetype, which I think is a better archetype than women as an object. But it is kind of interesting, and I guess like the later half, they're vulnerable. They have issues, but they're more realistic.
I guess what the point I was saying is like I mean, even though the second set of characters there's this vulnerability to them. It's not in a way that movies, especially of the time that they're trying to emulate with the first half, kind of view women as like they're too in their heads, they're emotional and stuff and whatnot. I mean, the vulnerability to the characters of the second half is very kind of like,
Realistic,
compassionate
or
in a way.
slightly more
Yeah, I mean,
realistic.
there's a depth to it, which is something that I do think that Quentin Tarantino does really
Pretty
well. I mean,
well, right?
he is really great at giving characters personality. Um,
No, I agree, and I think yeah, I wonder if there's almost a commentary at the start of how the 70s, primarily men, a lot of times men who work in exploitation, a lot of people who made grindhouse movies, if they weren't actively also working on pornography, were former pornography people. And I wonder if that uh, maybe created an environment where we didn't have the strongest written female characters in movies like this. So maybe the start was kind of a commentary on that, and then the end was, and maybe that's why it had the grindhouse filter, and eventually they switched over to a more modern filter as a way of saying this is kind of more of the realistic portrayal. I don't know. I'm just spitballing ideas. I might just be making shit up, putting thoughts in Tarantino's head. Um, but it is something interesting to ponder, especially with that kind of strong through line of kind of trying to write realistic women and stand up for women in film, like Tarantino surprisingly kind of does.
yeah, I would agree. I think we're on the same page with that. I think this movie is just kind of. I think part of the reaction to it is also due to um, due to Quentin Tarantino himself being a little unhappy with it. I don't know if that's a reaction to it being. I don't know if you know this. This is his first like certifiable like box office flop. um, Looking at it, I mean, the budget was estimated around 30 million, and it pretty much grossed that at the box office. It was not a hit, and I think there
Right.
is a little part of him that is not used to that and is um kind of convinced himself that it's like, oh well, it wasn't a hit because I made a shitty movie, and it's just like, instead of just, it wasn't a hit because people at the time just didn't connect to it, kind of thing.
Well, I also think there's an aspect of the marketing him and Roger or Robert. I don't know why I keep trying to call him Roger Rodriguez. Robert Rodriguez, kind of put towards this grindhouse movement, which I think kind of killed the momentum rather than kind of doing like a. I was about to use the really bad example of Dogma 95 because all of those movies were flops, but rather than kind of setting up a thesis or perhaps like a kind of a label, they were packaging the movies together, they were packaging them separate, no one really knew if they were related. There were all these faux trailers, and the marketing behind it was really weird, and it was come up by these two directors. And I think especially on Quentin Tarantino's half, he felt like he was on a hot streak, couldn't fail type of momentum and path. And then I think they, rather than I just think part of it's the marketing, and part of it's hard to connect when even circa 2007. I mean, the nostalgia for this movie was fair. The nostalgia this movie is supposed to bring is fairly niche. And
Sure.
interestingly, the most probably the most successful thing that has come out of these two films is the Machete franchise.
Yeah, I guess in a way, yeah. I mean, truthfully, I prefer Machete to either of these movies. But that's just me. I
Right.
just really like that movie.
I think the
I
last
can't
time
say the same for Machete Kills.
I saw Machete before I saw either of these films, and I think we watched Machete together in middle school or something.
Yeah.
On Netflix or wherever it was streaming at the time. Probably Netflix or Hulu because that's what they had. But yeah, I vividly remember Machete. I haven't seen it in a long time. But it is kind of funny that, you know, you have Machete, you have Eli Roth making his Thanksgiving movie set to come out this year. Like, I guess there is kind of a lasting impact.
There was Hobo with a Shotgun as well.
A Shotgun, yeah, I forgot about that, but that was also in the oeuvre. It is kind of interesting that their circle, perhaps the most reverent people for this film are the people in the circle who worked with Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez closely. It seems like their friends grappled onto these ideas and continue to keep this grindhouse movement alive more than perhaps the fans do, which is just an interesting note. I think Grindhouse, or I think Death Proof as a film is pretty good. If I had to rate it off the top of my head right now, I'd give it like a 3.5 stars out of 5.
Yeah, I'm with you. 7 out of 10. Yeah. I think it's well done. I enjoy it. To me, as a 7 out of 10 is earned.
Yeah, I think it's a fun movie, and I think it has some warrant.
There's a lot to it.
However, I still think it's entirely fair. Even though I think I enjoy it more than a lot of people, maybe in the general public too, because I also kind of appreciate grindhouse movies. Like, I'm a big fan of like Vinegar Syndrome and stuff, which the movies they put out are direct inspirations for kind of this grindhouse movement. So to me, as I wear my lime green Vinegar Syndrome Medusa shirt, I appreciate what they're going for. I think in terms of Tarantino's filmography, it is on the lower end in my personal opinion, and I think that's a opinion the public unanimously kind of holds. I don't think we're breaking any new ground.
There are definitely some people that are kind of like in the Jackie Brown camp, where if this is their favorite, they love being vocal about that. Which is fine.
And I know people,
I would just disagree.
I know people who I haven't talked to them directly about Tarantino, but especially just being kind of in that Vinegar Syndrome boutique Blu-ray realm. I know people who would probably see Death Proof as their favorite Tarantino movie. So I know those people, so I assume they're out there. But yeah, do you have anything else to add on Death Proof?
Not really. That is pretty much everything I have to say about it. I don't have like a super strong opinion of it, other than it is not as bad as people initially made it out to be.
Yeah, I also think
and to give it if you gave it a pass one time and didn't like it, I would highly recommend checking it out again, because I do think it has a lot of value to it.
I think one thing that's interesting and worth noting is this is the first film not by Miramax. However, Miramax was owned by the Weinsteins. This was by Dimension Films, which was a sub-label of Miramax, later owned by Disney, and then falling back into the hands of the Weinstein Company eventually. So,
this was financed by both Bob and Harvey Weinstein.
So it is kind of interesting that literally up till Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Tarantino was directly being funded by two nefarious Hollywood characters. Because his next film, which we're about to talk about, was the first one by the Weinstein Company. But I think you know, as tragic as the whole story behind the Weinsteins is, I think we should get into Inglourious Basterds.
Oh, I'm here for it.
Yeah, I know you're ready for Inglourious Basterds.
I
Was this the first
Yeah,
Tarantino movie you saw, or was this kind of the first new Tarantino movie
it
you
was the
saw?
first one that I was made aware of. Because I remember distinctly seeing the trailer for it, um, and kind of being like, "What the what the fuck is this?"
Right.
and uh, his name is proudly on that trailer as like the new film by Quentin Tarantino, and I was like, who's this guy? And then had gone back. I don't know if I think Reservoir Dogs was still the first Tarantino movie I saw. It was
Right.
either that or Inglorious Bastards. And I'll full disclosure. I know I said last time that I think Kill Bill is his best overall. Um, this is like my favorite. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. I love it to death. I've watched this movie like close to like 50 times.
Right.
I can't get enough of it.
It's an
Um,
amazing movie. It genuinely is.
I love it. I love it so much. It is incredibly well made. I think it is kind of a reaction to um, Death Proof being kind of a failure for him, because there is so much life and energy and passion behind this, where it feels like he's just firing on all cylinders, and is kind of making this statement of like, I still have it. I'm not this, I'm not losing it. I'm not this fraud. This is something that I'm genuinely very proud of.
Right.
And um yeah, I think it is it's my favorite of his.
Right. I mean, Death Proof was his flash in the pan passion project. And I'm not saying this wasn't a passion project, but we see
Yeah,
him go back to
he had been working
his.
on this. He had been working on this film since the '90s. I know.
Yeah.
He had been writing it.
I mean, but
Because
this is probably the first time he was able to work on this scale, because you look at Death Proof and the Kill Bills; those are all $30 million movies. Jackie Brown was 12 million. Pulp Fiction was 8 million. Reservoir Dogs was less. So this was kind of his first time. I would say getting into at least upper mid budget. I wouldn't really say he ever hit the big budget realm. Besides maybe Django and Once Upon a Time in and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which were both about $100 million movies. But Inglourious Bastards is
yeah, that is big
upper
budget.
mid. I mean, maybe even 2009, 70 million was big budget, but nowadays, sadly, it is not. Um, I wonder
Yeah, I mean, hey, it's every penny is
on screen.
spent. Yeah, just incredibly well. Once again, he surrounds himself with a really wonderful, eclectic cast of actors, and you can tell that everyone is really really into the script and what they're trying to portray and to get across with the audience. Um, I think, yeah, it's I this movie so much.
Right. And I mean, obviously, I have to point out, just because I'm a film nerd, much like Django Unchained, this takes its name from a 60s Italian film, which was the aptly titled The Inglorious Bastards. And even though the plots aren't incredibly aligned, other than World War II
Killing
films,
Nazis. I think that's pretty much it.
World War II, just like Django isn't very aligned to the standard Django loose series. But it is worth noting that he again wears his influences on his sleeves. He says, "I'm going to take the name of this 1978 Italian war film and use it for my big budget movie with fucking Brad Pitt as the lead character." Which, speaking of Brad Pitt, the performances in this movie are particularly amazing, and especially after Death Proof, which the biggest star in Death Proof was basically Rosario Dawson.
Yeah. I mean,
this is
Mary
kind of-
Elizabeth Winstead and Kurt Russell. You know,
I don't know what I'm talking about. You're actually totally right. There are some big stars in there, but this movie feels like he relishes in the movie star more.
this is
Perhaps.
yeah. This is like a movie star cast. This is like people who you put the face on the poster to sell the movie.
Right, and I also think perhaps
they are there.
there are big stars in a lot of his movies, whether they become bigger stars because of Tarantino or movies that happen later. But I almost want to say that starting with Inglourious Basterds, and especially Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you almost have a fetishization of movie stars. Is that unfair to say about
it's
the 2010s to 2010s, because he hasn't made a film in the 2020s, but is that unfair to say about like 2010s and Tarantino?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I'm glad that you bring this up because my most recent viewing, this is easily his most political film. And not just with like the Nazi stuff. Also in terms of there is both this reverence for cinema, particularly international cinema, but also kind of a condemnation of it. There's multiple references to Leni Riefenstahl, who was a very famous actress turned. She was like kind of the filmmaker for the Nazi regime. She is probably most well known now for directing Triumph of the Will. Maybe influential, a piece of propaganda ever made. There's tons of that. There's references to G.W. Pabst, Louis B. But then, particularly, there's one part that really stands out to me is like the inclusion of Emile Zola, which is super interesting. Or not Emile Zola. That is Emil Jannings, the actor who was I want to say he was the first actor to win an Academy Award for acting. It's all peppered in there, but it is very, very much there where it's like, there's this kind of appreciation and respect for it, but there's also definitely this thing of like, these people did collaborate with, these people who committed these horrible things,
taking over Europe and all that. Well, it's interesting because you look at, I think it's almost worth bringing up the relation of because Quentin Tarantino has a reverence for film history. Obviously, we talked a lot about his interest in like 70s films and stuff, but film history in general, and kind of the danger, because if you get a great filmmaker, you can make some really dangerous propaganda, like you were talking about with
Leni Riefenstahl.
Yeah, and on top of the Nazi films, you have like Birth of a Nation and stuff like that, which obviously wouldn't make sense to touch on in this film, but it is kind of worth bringing up that I do think
absolutely
in a way there's a lot of scenes in the cinema, and it shows how impactful these are, and when they burn down the cinema, it's almost like in a different movie, it would be like destroying a super weapon, because I think Quentin Tarantino wants to comment on how powerful cinema can be. especially in the
absolutely.
wrong hands, which I think
Well,
is an
especially with
interesting aspect.
especially with the climax of the movie taking place entirely in a movie theater, and like that being the collapse of the Third Reich. I mean, it is very apparent there of like what he's trying to say, and there is definitely like he has this kind of not reverence, but like a sense of compassion for overlooked or underrepresented communities. I mean, literally the the one of the protagonists of the film is this Jewish woman who survives, who's the sole survivor of her family being murdered at the hands of the SS, and it's very much like when he's emulating his '70s style. There's a lot of especially Jackie Brown, like a black woman, there is this respect that he does give to his black characters in a way that maybe some of the filmmakers that he's trying to emulate wouldn't have that same kind of compassion for
Yeah.
people like that.
Yeah. No. Here's a question: would you consider Quentin Tarantino the Eminem of movie making? I that was another. I was just joking because in the first episode, I compared Quentin Tarantino to Nickelback. So this one, I thought I would compare him to another
I think
quality cinema or musical artist.
Yeah, I think it's definitely more apt to compare him to that, given the vocal fans who are incredibly annoying, and kind of this, if you want to get into it, yeah, kind of creating a career off of aping a black art, but also to an extent being good at it to an extent.
Yeah,
I think Quentin Tarantino is a lot more consistent than Eminem.
that's
But
fair.
yeah,
Perhaps I made a more. I was trying to. I was trying to make a joke, but perhaps it's not a totally unfair comparison to derail our Inglourious Bastards discussion entirely to
this is now the
compare Tarantino
retrospective.
to Eminem. So I guess what I have to ask is, what are your thoughts on the Slim Shady LP? I'm just, but anyways, yeah.
No
back
comment.
to back to Inglourious Bastards. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think, and on top of that, I think I guess Kill Bill in a lot of ways is, but this is a film where I feel like especially with this film and Inglourious Basterds, they're kind of a duology of films that takes reverence on revenge, not necessarily because of direct consequences, but just because he's like, these people are pieces of shit, so the audience would love to watch them just get fucked up.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of prominent in his films past Inglourious Basterds. Like Kill Bill is almost a straight up revenge film. Not that we don't believe these characters are pieces of shit, but there's almost a motivation where I feel like Brad Pitt doesn't have a personal motivation against Nazi number 3, who he does horrendous things to.
Yeah, aside from the fact that he is a Nazi.
Yeah.
And that's literally all it takes is for him to.
I'm not saying it's unfair.
There's a really wonderful. I love. I know I said Jackie Brown is probably the best thing he's ever written, but this has some of my favorite little bits of dialogue.
Sure.
Like Aldo Rain's kind of monologue. Yeah, monologue to his. To the bastards, where he's just talking about, he's like, we are going to be as cruel to them as they are to the rest of the world, and it's something like he specifically is like asking for Jewish soldiers because there's this thing of like listen to how he's listen to how this guy over here is like speaking about your people, and we know what he's doing over there, and we're going over there to show him that we we really don't fucking like this, and I love it.
Right.
It is it's just so much fun.
No, I agree.
Because I know, we talked a little bit about Brad Pitt, and I know Christoph Waltz gets a ton of credit for this movie because he is great. But I feel like it kind of overshadows Pitt in this movie, who is such a treat to watch. He is clearly having a blast. And yeah, that's some of my favorite
Right.
little bit of dialogue. It's a wonderful introduction to the character and exactly what they're going for, and then
I mean,
it's
I'll
just
also
great.
say this is kind of our introduction to Quentin Tarantino working with two collaborators who he would work with later, and do amazing things with, Brad Pitt and Christoph Waltz, both who I think Tarantino can bring a great performance out of. I think Brad Pitt's great in this movie and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I don't think Brad
Oh
Pitt's
yeah,
the most consistent actor in the world. There's some roles he certainly phones in. Christoph Waltz, I think is pretty next level, but Tarantino still does a great job with him. But I appreciate that Tarantino can challenge Brad Pitt enough that he wants to bring his all. I think that's good.
yeah.
I think it really works out in this movie.
I don't know if I would necessarily agree with what you're saying about Brad Pitt. I really like him. I think he's consistently great for me. He works whatever he is. He's very charming. He's got this. It's funny because he's kind of this. He's clearly a movie star. Like he's got the looks, he's got the charm, he's got the star power, but he is clearly made to be like a character actor. He's just too handsome to be it. They had to like force him to be a movie star because he
Right.
really shines in those fringe, characters.
Well, that's definitely the vibe I get. So maybe it's unfair to say Brad Pitt is a bad actor or doesn't always have the best performances, because you do look through his stuff and he really does have a lot of good roles. But at the same time, if it wasn't for the fact that he's Brad Pitt and he's just kind of the most generically movie star human being to ever be born, right up there with Tom Cruise, um, I definitely agree. I think if it wasn't for his looks, he would make an amazing character actor. But because of how he looks, he kind of gets put into starring roles, which
Yeah, he's
I
just
almost
cursed with being too handsome.
and I almost think a generic leading, yeah, in from an acting perspective, it is a double bladed sword, because I mean, you look at his character, he is the lead in Inglourious Basterds, definitively, but he does kind of have a character actor feel where he's kind of playing not your typical leading man. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's a good example of him taking the kind of the taking shotgun on that movie. Obviously
Absolutely.
Leonardo DiCaprio is the star, and he gets to just play this wacky character. Not to get into Once Upon a Time in Hollywood too much, but
Oh, we'll get there eventually. I have a lot of things to say about that as well.
oh yeah, no, I have tons to say. But I think that's actually a pretty good read on Brad Pitt. I think that's a more accurate take than what my original tangent was. But I definitely agree. I think perhaps Quentin Tarantino just puts him in good roles, and even like you look at something. Have you seen Babylon at all with Brad Pitt and Margot
Yeah,
Robbie?
I've seen it twice.
He kind of plays a
I
similar character where he, rather than being the washed up stuntman, he's the washed up movie star. But he kind of plays a similar
he's
role to like Cliff in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and he's
I
great
was
in
gonna
that
say
movie.
he's like Rick Dalton in a way
He's
of
kind of
past
a
his prime and just
merger of Cliff and Rick Dalton.
yeah, not being able to come to terms with it. I fuck with Babylon. I think that movie was a little. It is a mess. And it's kind of schlocky, and it's very much just Boogie Nights, but in the 1920s. But also, that movie kind of a blast. I like it a lot. But yeah. No, he's great. I think he's awesome in that. I think he's great in this. Yeah, he's fantastic. Obviously, Christoph Waltz really does steal the show because Hans Landa is just this really wonderful character who is just, you can't take your eyes off of him because he's just so just fucking grim and evil, and he knows it and he enjoys it, and he just like is like such a son of a bitch. You can't help but watch him, and it's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Back, I guess. Do you have any like wrap up thoughts on Inglourious Basterds, or another tangent to go on, or?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the ending, because it is
Right.
one of, I think, like I said, this is my favorite Quentin Tarantino film by far. It's top 20 movies of all time for me, and it is one of the most satisfying endings I've ever. I I won't lie. I have put this movie in, and just skipped to that scene before just watching the whole thing over again. And I should also point out, I think this is the last film that Quentin Tarantino made with Sally Menke.
Right. Yeah,
before she
we were
passed
going
away.
to mention that because.
And this is a really like her presence, like the lack of presence in especially Django and the Hateful Eight. I feel it because this movie is so well edited. The pacing is perfect. I mean, this movie's 2.5 hours long, and it just flies by for me. I think when the movie needs to slow down and really like just marinate in the scenery with the characters, it's like the perfect amount of time before some big exciting action happens or some big moment, and then we go back to just it's like perfect. It's like a roller coaster almost, and it's just like perfectly paced for me. I love it. I think it's some of the best work she's ever done. It's one of my favorite. It's just it's something that I always bring up as like good editing, because it is just perfect. I mean, yeah, I'm gonna love it. It is a 10 out of 10 for me. I have no issues with it whatsoever. I love it to death. But yeah, it holds a very special place in my heart.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, obviously, Sally Menke is best known for her work with Tarantino. But you definitely feel that presence, and mentioning it. There's definitely kind of a change of pace with the editing going forward, because she worked with them from Reservoir Dogs all the way up to Inglourious Basterds. So, and I think the editors especially, and I'm guilty of this as much as anybody else. I don't think editors get enough credit in Hollywood, especially.
Not in the like populist sense, where like
Sure.
people talk about movie stars and stuff, or like certain directors, but you look at certain filmmakers who have a noticeable style and rhythm to them, like Martin Scorsese has worked with Thelma Schoonmaker on every single movie since Raging Bull, or since even earlier. she has edited every single one of his films, and there is clearly a wonderful collaboration between those two. It's just like with Quentin and Sally. There's clearly a lot of respect because she has a very distinct editing style, and I think that is also just due to the fact that like maybe Quentin Tarantino just knows how to communicate what he's looking for, and she had the same
approach,
appeal, and approach. But it is very much there, and it's very much lacking.
I mean, the talent of the director is either two. There's two talents, and I think with someone like Quentin Tarantino or Scorsese, it's you got to think like the director thinks to put this vision to screen. Wherein, then there's some editors
you just got to trust your editor in a way.
Yeah,
and I think also, you could say the same.
Right. I think in both cases. I also think it's kind of interesting, and this is kind of off the Quentin Tarantino beaten path, but there are a higher number of female editors than most other roles in Hollywood, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
I think, I think, and I hate to say this, but I think the less attention gives them more opportunities because women in Hollywood get one chance to do anything, and if they fuck up, their career is done. I mean, I don't think Patty Jenkins is a great director, but an example, she did Wonder Woman, made a huge movie, and then she made that shitty Wonder Woman 2, and now her career is just dead. She's had nothing but missed opportunities since.
Which is kind of unfair because, I mean, I should also point out, I mean, this is the last film that Quentin Tarantino directed that was also produced by Lawrence Bender, who had produced every single film of his up until this point. To me, my understanding is that it was like kind of an amicable split. I can't find anything that says otherwise online. But I feel like there is something there as well. That like with Django especially, is him kind of like finding his footing again. Because it is there, like having a couple key collaborators missing, it is going to shake things up a little bit. I still really like Django, but yeah.
But I do think even without context, and people who are listening to this, correct me if I'm wrong, but I definitely feel like there's almost a switch in his career, a noticeable switch in his career post Django that I think I picked up on even before I got more into film and started looking into the background of a lot of these filmmakers. And I feel like I've learned some stuff through doing this podcast too. But I feel like even as kind of a kid, I noticed kind of a noticeable change when you pick up from Django.
Sure. I mean, this is also like kind of the start of like the second half of his career where, I mean, Death Proof was the last movie he made that, takes place in a contemporary setting. I mean, everything post Death Proof is a period piece.
Right. I believe the Movie Critic is supposed to also kind of, in a way, like you have Django and Hateful Eight, which is his take on the Old West, and two different sides of the Old West. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and the Movie Critic feel like two different sides of 70s Hollywood, 60s, 70s Hollywood, which he has so much reverence for, because my understanding is we're Once Upon a Time in Hollywood about the A-list glamour and the decay of that. The Movie Critic is somebody from the fucking trenches looking up.
Yeah. I mean, you could also, I mean, it's also just like the state of the world, even. I mean, he's going through some really key moments, mostly in American history, especially with like, the antebellum South with Django and post slavery in the Hateful Eight, and up until the end of the '60s with Hollywood. Not to get too ahead, but I mean also with this. I mean the Europe, the European circuit in the 1940s is a pretty important time in world history where you could argue we're still feeling the effects from the World War II and the rise of fascism.
I mean, the entire world changed.
For sure. And I think
Obviously.
he's
I mean, that's why it's called World War II.
Very much, yeah, he's very much reflecting on it, though. And I think it's very interesting.
I mean, I think he loves to comment on kind of culture changes.
Sure.
Especially when you look at Inglourious Basterds being the end of World War II, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood kind of being the end of the baby boomer movement into the nostalgia's gone, at least from Tarantino's standpoint. And in Tarantino's standpoint, I think the end of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood kind of marks the end of nostalgia in a way. At least that's how it's framed. Obviously, nostalgia hits different for people of different ages. But like this kind of, I mean, the 60s were violent. It was a violent time. And I think a lot of that's commented on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but we're obviously jumping ahead of ourselves.
I was going to say, I think we're getting a little ahead.
We're still on Inglourious Basterds, which, I do think, while we cut his career clean in half for this podcast, I do think in a lot of ways, as you have mentioned, we could have easily made a clean split after Inglourious Basterds, because I do see that as I see Inglourious Basterds as a huge turning point in his filmography. It's the start of change. I mean, it's the first one that isn't by Miramax, because Dimension Films is just a side part of Miramax, and obviously he continues to work with the Weinsteins, but he also sees more widespread distribution, with Universal and Sony picking up all of his movies but The Hateful Eight after this.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess going into Django Unchained, I think I would like to kind of introduce this one, if that's okay, because while you were being kind of reverent towards Inglourious Basterds and Reservoir Dogs, I might have seen Reservoir Dogs before Django with you. But the first time I think I would consider myself a fan of Tarantino is when I saw Django, and I feel like everybody has the I mean, I was the perfect age for Django. I was 14 years old. I had a pretty good interest in film already, so I mean, maybe not Django specifically, but Tarantino in general definitely is something that was meant to appeal to me at that age. So Django really worked for me, but on top of that, it tackled serious issues, but also in a way that my dumb 14-year-old brain thought was really fun, and my dumb 25-year-old brain still thinks is pretty fun, admittedly. So yeah, I definitely think Django Unchained is a very interesting film. And like Inglourious Basterds, like I said, kind of named off of a spaghetti western motif, with Django being it was originally a couple movies, and then people realized the Django name was untrademarked, and now there are a lot of Django movies, and that's probably a big reason that Tarantino was able to make a Django movie, because it's sort of a public domain legend franchise. It'd be like calling your movie Billy the Kid, except Billy the Kid was a real person, where Django was just some made up guy. So I love Django Unchained. What do you have? What's your commentary on Django Unchained, Grant?
Yeah, I think Django is very long. I think it's very messy at times. I think it is a bit unfocused towards the middle. Like that second act where it's just them kind of, setting up bounties to, further Django's goal. It's a little meandering. Like I said, this being the first movie that was edited not by Sally Menke but by Fred Raskin, who I believe he started as an assistant editor with Sally Menke, or he was obviously people get started like that, but I know he was like an assistant editor on a couple Quentin Tarantino flicks before this. So clearly there was like this like familiarity with each other.
Yeah, so he was the assistant editor on. He was the assistant editor on Kill Bill 1 and 2.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's kind of where he pulled him from.
That's it.
And he continues to do a lot of editing. He's a little less working within the confines of Tarantino. Like
Mm-hmm.
Sally Menke worked on very few projects that weren't Tarantino. He's actually
I know
he's the go-to director for James Gunn. He did the Guardians trilogy, Suicide Squad, and Peacemaker.
Okay, yeah. Okay, he did Peacemaker as well. Okay. I know he's kind of James Gunn's go-to director, or editor, which makes sense. A very stylized, filmmaker who does have a lot of pull and influence from the 70s.
It's not entirely surprising that they were able to build a relationship in the same way him and Tarantino were able to later on in his career post Menke.
For sure.
I
guess aside from all the issues I have with it, though, I still really, really love this movie. It is when it has its highs, it is awesome. It is maybe the most cartoonish movie Quentin Tarantino's ever done.
I think that's fair to say.
It is a live action cartoon. It's also very angry. I feel like it's like the angriest film he's ever made. Especially in especially with the movies he's made that focus on like revenge. There is this, maybe not so much from Django the whole time, but there is this like kind of flat out disdain for this really unfortunate time in American history.
Right. I mean, it takes elements from. I think in a lot of ways you have Django has a personal vendetta, much like the Bride does in Kill Bill, but he also has kind of an agenda against this group of people who are marginalizing his people, all Inglourious Basterds, and I think Tarantino definitely relishes in seeing those people kind of brought to revenge, or vengeance brought upon those people, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's very interesting to have Django be a character who is kind of experiencing both sides of the law. I mean, because at this time slavery is still legal. So he starts off as a piece of property and then is quickly given his freedom, and then is essentially working as an agent of the government that allows him to be sold as property. And it's very interesting to me with how it's played,
Right.
because Django is clearly there's clearly like this disdain for the white man and white slavers, but yet there's also interestingly, like I don't know if it totally works for me, the dynamic with Schultz being someone who's like, oh, I despise slavery, but also I'm going to use it for my benefit for the time being, kind of thing. I don't know. Maybe I might be reading too into it, but maybe it's Tarantino making a comment about white activism, in the name of people of color, a la white activists kind of hijacking events and protests being led by like
Well,
black
is it
activists, or like the
unfair
Black
to
Lives Matter.
totally compare Christoph Waltz's character to Tarantino himself? Because in a way, much like Christoph Waltz's character, Tarantino is kind of taking advantage of these events for his time, even though he condemns them, and he's still like a white dude making money off of the backs
Yeah,
of this historical event. Perhaps
absolutely.
he wasn't directly commenting on that, but it is kind of not even a counterpoint, just something that's interesting to point out.
It's peppered in there to where I can't tell if it's intentional or not. It's just something that I definitely picked up on rewatching this earlier this year.
Right.
But it's definitely like interesting. I think there's a lot more substance to the idea of race in America in this movie compared to the Hateful Eight. While it's still there, I think it is explored a little deeper in this movie. And I also find this movie to be a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah, I want to talk about a couple aspects of Django I think is kind of interesting. Well, there is reverence for the spaghetti western genre, and I've heard people describe this as a spaghetti western, which I think Tarantino would want you to describe it as a spaghetti western. I don't really see that. Obviously, he takes aspects from the two Sergios, Corbucci and Leone, and he even has Frank Nero in the film, Franco Nero,
playing Django.
Playing Django, who obviously he was in Corbucci's Corbucci's original Django film.
Yeah, that's a cute little moment.
It's a cute moment. So while it shows reverence for it, I'd consider it more of a pop western. Like, it has the violence of a spaghetti western, but it definitely has more of the, and even though it has deep themes, I almost want to say like a lighthearted and fun style, where you look at spaghetti westerns and they're fucking depressing, man. It's a depressing dude in a depressing time doing depressing shit.
Yeah, this movie is like surprisingly very sincere and tender, especially with the relationship between Schultz and Django. There is very much like, this feels intentional, of the like kind of fatherhood aspect. I mean, there's like that moment where they are, Schultz and Django are setting up camp, and they're having a fire, and Schultz is like telling Django essentially like a bedtime story.
Yeah,
and he teaches him he teaches him how to murder people, but there's like this there's the like the moment with like the clan members trying to like fuck with them after what's his name, Big Daddy, and Schultz is about to kill him as he's getting away, and he's like, "Do you want to do it?"
right.
Like, kind of has like this like passing of the torch, and then especially like there's that really tender moment where I think that there's a lot of humanity to Django, like almost like he's too innocent for this world to an extent, until it's like kind of necessarily like pushed into him, where he's like, you need to have this to survive, because there's like the Smitty Bacall killing, and he hesitates, and Schultz is kind of like, why are you waiting? And he's like, well, his son is with him. And it's like, there's this, he doesn't want to kill him because he doesn't want to, like, while he still has this like revenge against like white slavers, Smitty Bacall has done nothing to him. I mean, and for all we know, Smitty Bacall could be a slave-owning racist piece of shit.
Right.
But at this point in the movie, like, he's like, these people haven't really done anything. And Schultz just kind of passes it off as like, oh, so he won't be alone when he dies. But like, I mean, there's this real human moment to Django that I don't think we see um, in a lot of movies like this, or even like I just like a lot of action movies, or you know, like
Right.
yeah,
Well,
just like
I
yeah,
kind of want to
like
merge our
these kinds of characters.
I kind of want to merge our last 2 points. Tell me if you're following. In a lot of ways, this is both an American and a spaghetti western. In spaghetti westerns, you have a lot of blank slate characters, which I think Django is, because he's kind of gotten a, I don't want to say sheltered life because he was a slave, but a life where he hasn't seen the world. He's a little naive,
I
perhaps.
think
And what's
I think
interesting is
he
unlike something like The Man with No Name, who you almost feel like has seen everything in the world, Django's kind of the opposite. And in a lot of ways, I feel like his character arc goes similar to Matty Ross from True Grit.
sure.
And obviously you could compare it to the Coen's version, but I specifically in mind I have the Kim Darby version of Matty Ross, and you have this person who goes from kind of a naive adventurer to more hardened by the end. Perhaps not as hardened as Matty Ross because True Grit kind of takes a more serious turn. But
Yeah, Django maintains
Django,
like that lighthearted tone.
right, but Django has kind of has a slight character transition, so it's kind of interesting, and I think Django Unchained is a fun marriage of political commentary, American and Italian westerns, and also kind of a pop film from the 2010s, which keeps it relatable to modern audiences. Like it almost perfectly mixes like those four genres, and it pulls so much from each. And I think that's what makes Django kind of
Yeah.
a fun and enjoyable movie, even though I will agree with you that I think Django is somewhat of a mess at times. But I also think Django's an undeniably fun movie with a good lead cast. Well, I think it's easy to see the social commentary as puddle deep. There's obviously some deeper moments and some deeper things to delve into, but yeah, no, I just think it's really interesting, and especially as a fan of, I'm one of the few people who doesn't detest American westerns. I love American westerns and Italian westerns, and kind of seeing that mixed with Tarantino's bombastic modern style. It's awesome for me, and I definitely think like Jamie Foxx did a great job of kind of being a impressionable man, and you have
Yeah.
Leonardo DiCaprio as this despicable villain, and Christoph Waltz as this kind of mentor father figure. But he definitely has a dark side, and I think he kind of pays for his greed. Obviously, when he's killed later in the film. So
Yeah, because I mean, Django enters the bounty hunting world for essentially, I mean, kind of a selfish reason. But purely, yeah, I would say more selfless reasons, and like very sentimental, like sincere reasons, where he wants
it's
to buy his
noble,
wife's freedom so
right?
that they can live their lives as free people. Whereas like Schultz is just like, hey, it pays more than being a dentist.
Yeah, and Django also kind of naively believes, even up till the end, even up till the credits roll, that his life is going to be easy. He's going to be free now. It's going to be great. And the movie even kind of frames that. But if you look at it realistically, Django probably has quite the life ahead of him,
Yeah,
which I think is
absolutely.
interesting. And
But I'm
I'm
happy that
fine
it
with no
ends.
sequel. I'm fine with having the happy ending, but there's a lot.
Yeah,
There's a lot to ponder at the end if you think into it, or you can just kind of accept it as a happy ending and move on.
yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I mean, truthfully, not to editorialize, I like to think of it as like a happy ending, just because I think after everything Django has been through up until that point, he kind of deserves to be like happy. Because he has
Right.
suffered quite a bit. I mean, he's literally at the beginning of the film, he's a slave, a literal slave. Like sold as a piece of property. And by the end of the movie, he's not only gained his freedom, and his wife's freedom, but he's also dismantled this massive plantation where, like, I mean, they elaborate that in the middle of the movie where he's like, every slave in, I'm not gonna say the actual word, but every slave in the in the South knows about Candyland.
Right. Well, you also have an
and
aspect of, from a character standpoint, Django really finds himself by the end.
absolutely,
He becomes this free man. Christoph Waltz was kind of roasting him on his clothing, but he finds these nice clothing that he enjoys, and he's finally like an independent person and kind of free to continue to find himself post this ordeal he found himself in order to free his wife and kind of reclaim his family.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
Django's a great film. I think it's one of Quentin Tarantino's more fun films, even though obviously there's a very dark subtext. But I really enjoy this film.
Yeah, I'm with you, 100%. I enjoy it very much. I think Django is a really fun character. And again, kind of Christoph Waltz kind of steals the show. But Jamie Foxx is really, really wonderful in this. He's got this kind of at the start of Django, he's got this like wonderful kind of humanity to him that then kind of molds him into this calloused, action, bounty hunter badass. And then by the end of the movie, he kind of almost regresses back to less of that cool facade. And by the end of the movie, he's goofing off on the horse after Candyland has been like blown up. And he's playing around with the horse with his wife and stuff, and he's kind of free to be his own person, and not have to put on this charade anymore. He's allowed to just be himself, and I think that that's really wonderful.
Right. No, I agree. I guess we'll come back to Django with our rankings at the end, but are you ready to move on to the Hateful Eight?
Yeah.
I think again, I think the Hateful Eight is kind of a 180 from Django in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
You know what it kind of reminds me of from a pacing and feel standpoint, and I would totally understand if everybody thinks I'm an idiot, but when this movie comes up in my mind and the feel I get when I watch this movie, for some reason, it feels like a couple of movies. One that comes directly to mind is one thing that comes directly to mind is actually Barry Lyndon for some reason, and I don't know why, but whenever I watch this movie, I get in a Barry Lyndon mood, which is kind of odd.
I don't know if I can say much to that. I haven't seen Barry Lyndon.
You haven't seen Barry
It's
Lyndon?
on. No, it's the only Kubrick I haven't seen. It's sitting on my shelf.
I have seen every Kubrick movie. That might actually be our next filmmaker episode. We can do some episodes before that, but I would love to do an episode on Kubrick, and I would love for you to have an excuse to watch Barry Lyndon. Because in a lot of ways, to me, this feels like Quentin Tarantino's Barry Lyndon. It also has aspects which Western fans are going to be like, what the hell are you talking about? And Kubrick fans are already saying, what the hell are you talking about? But the other film it really reminds me of is The Sons of Katie Elder, which is kind of a late period John Wayne American Western. It's about like three brothers or four brothers trying to reclaim their family's ranch from some corrupt politicians. It's nothing like The Hateful Eight when I describe the plot, but for some reason it gives me that vibe.
Okay.
So those are my two dumb opinions for the episode. But both of those, and I doubt either of those are even particularly inspirations for The Hateful Eight. But those are the two movies that come to mind. So I was gonna mention, them.
Interesting.
But
Yeah,
those are two movies you haven't seen and can't comment
yeah,
on.
two movies I haven't seen, so I don't know how much. I do know you've seen this, and I think it's very apparent, is the influence that the Hateful Eight has, is The Thing.
Oh yeah, for
Um,
sure.
I mean, even down to the score, the Ennio Morricone score, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the only Quentin Tarantino film that has a dedicated score. Um, to my knowledge, it is,
Yeah, a lot
because
of
everything else has just
his.
been strictly soundtrack.
Yeah, he typically goes with the jukebox style of,
And he does it
which,
very well.
going back to the editor Fred Raskin, is probably another reason James Gunn loves him, is because he works on Tarantino movies, who loves his jukebox style. Uh, but this is, I definitely think this is a different type of Tarantino movie, where Django. I mean, I know I was arguing that it's not entirely a spaghetti western. This one definitely feels more American Western, slow, philosophical style than something like Django, which is definitely more of like a fun action movie.
Sure.
This one is a lot more philosophical. It's just kind of a bunch of assholes in a house, which is probably why it reminds me of The Sons of Katie Elder, is because there's a lot of scenes of assholes in houses talking. And this movie continues that. I know it might be a little earlier in our discussion, but I don't love this movie.
Me neither.
Like Death Proof, I don't think it's bad.
No, I like it. I don't love it.
Yeah,
It is a long way from love territory for me.
yeah, it's an okay movie. I think the performances are strong, especially Samuel L. Jackson and Kurt Russell are two standouts, and Tim Roth, as those three typically tend to be huge standouts in the movies they show up. But everybody was kind of a nice little touch. And going back to actors, Channing Tatum shows up in this briefly, and he's another person where I think, like Brad Pitt, he's a better character actor who's too handsome to be a character actor. Perhaps Channing Tatum
Yeah,
would be a little more fair to say has duds in his filmography. But as a character actor, I typically have fun with Channing Tatum, where as a
I
boring leading
think
man.
he is a ton of fun, and yeah, again, kind of like, yeah, you nailed it right on the head, just with the Brad Pitt comparison, because he really is too handsome to be a, this he's like destined to be a character actor, but like cursed with this, like, handsome sex appeal to him, because he is wonderful, and it's so fun when he shows up in this movie, because at this point, I mean, his name is in the credits, but that was 2 fucking hours ago, and you've just been watching this exhausting display of just this hateful energy. I mean, like, the movie really earns its title as the Hateful Eight. I think this might be, I know I just said Django was a very angry film. This is easily the angriest film Tarantino's ever made.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just the
everybody's vengeful, and
awful.
everybody.
Nobody comes out looking well here. I mean,
Right.
they're all just awful people, and it's just, again, I feel like it's kind of like something he explored a little bit with Pulp Fiction, where it's just this cruel, uncaring, cold nature of the universe, where it's just, the world is just kind of it just kind of creates these awful people.
I do kind of love the idea of the tangled web where everybody has a secret, and everybody. It's
Yeah.
almost like a game. It's almost like a 2 hour, almost 3 hour game of poker. It feels like,
Yeah.
where everybody's holding their hands, and once everybody starts revealing their cards, everybody starts losing. It's once
Yeah.
people can't hold it in anymore, their poker faces finally break. Is when you start to see literal blood spilling.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think that's interesting. I definitely like going into this, especially out of Django. One might assume this would be somewhat of like a spaghetti western, like not even spaghetti western. I would almost say like a Magnificent Seven style, which is another movie I didn't bring up, but is sort of Django-esque. A guns blazing western action western, but Tarantino took the western setting in a different route. Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah. This feels almost like an anti-Western.
yeah, I do like that it's a
You know,
different.
almost like something like out of a Cormac McCarthy novel, with where you just have this. I mean, Cormac McCarthy, his dialogue is very sparse, and quick, whereas this is like, I mean, slow and just kind of everyone's just taking their time to just say these awful things to each other. With like
Right.
Cormac McCarthy, he has these sparse moments of really brutal violence, with this really beautifully written reverence to nature, and I really get that with this movie, especially because I mean, um, the the great Robert Richardson, really taking advantage of the ultra Panavision lenses with
Oh
the
yeah.
70 millimeter film. I mean, this film looks fantastic. These really wonderful landscape shots, especially like in the beginning, like of that Wyoming country. And it's gorgeous, and it's really too bad that 80% of the movie takes place in a fucking one room cabin, where I'm almost like, this would have been a really great play, and I don't know if it translates very well to like fully as a film, which is odd coming from a Tarantino film, for me. But it's definitely like, I don't know, yeah, like almost like he's trying to
Right.
blend the style of Elmore Leonard and Cormac McCarthy with this one,
Well,
which is very interesting.
because I love to talk about my John Wayne late period Paramount westerns. I could easily see the Hateful Eight being a vile remake of one of those westerns. Like I said, because I love talking about genre, and I feel like me and Mr. Tarantino have similar genre loves. Uh, it definitely has that vibe of the more philosophical western with older characters. Who's right, who's wrong? It turns out everybody's kind of wrong, and then guns start
Mhm.
blazing. That's a pretty standard late period Wayne plot. And I wonder, because this movie, I mean, Quentin Tarantino's actively said he's making 10 films, counting Kill Bill as 2. I almost wonder if he sees his time starting to expire as a filmmaker, and that's why he's made a movie like this. Do I think it works perfectly? Not really. But it's definitely interesting. It's definitely
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I mean, even then, I think this might be my least favorite. I don't want to say it's his weakest or his worst, because I don't want to imply that it's bad, because I do really like this movie. Um, but yeah, just compared to the the movies of his that I really truly love, um, you know, if I'm going to follow this, I mean, putting this sandwiched in between Django and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, two movies that I adore. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood gets better every time I watch it. And coming off of Inglourious Basterds as well, this movie really sticks out in terms of like the company it's in, where I'm just like, yeah, this might be the last movie I would have someone throw on if they wanted to watch a Quentin Tarantino movie.
I will also note this movie, particularly, it made about a third, not a third. It made a little under half of what Django made, but it was also made on about half the budget, and I don't think it was intended for as wide of an audience. I think it's definitely more for the Tarantino diehards.
Yeah.
It's also kind of worth noting that I think this is also a point where Tarantino started thinking about shifting into things like novels and stuff. I almost wish Hateful Eight was made as anything but a film by Tarantino. Like, I would have preferred it as a novel or preferred it as a play.
Yeah. It's odd that Hollywood is the first novelization of his films. Like, because this is almost like begging to be a novel or even a play.
Right, and I'll be honest. I haven't seen the extended cut that's on Netflix, and I'm wondering if that works better, being 2 hours, 210 minutes, and being divided into episodes. I wonder if it almost works more like a stage play, and I'm wondering if that was part of the intention. But seeing it on the cinema screen, and then again, I've seen it maybe once or twice at home. About the 3 times I've seen The Hateful Eight, I always kind of have a feeling of like it almost doesn't feel like it needed to be a film. It almost feels like it's in the wrong medium. And I definitely see the creativity. I don't think it's a bad movie. It doesn't feel like it fully fits in the Tarantino timeline. It's more of a gray goose. Or gray duck. What's the fucking expression? Ugly duckling? It's kind of an ugly duckling on the fucking franchise. I said gray goose because I was thinking of vodka. But you know what I'm saying? Like, it almost doesn't fit as well in the oeuvre of Tarantino. But I don't really have many more thoughts on The Hateful Eight. I wish I could go into more in-depth commentary on it, but I don't have much more to say personally. Do you have anything else to say, or do you want to go into Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
Honestly, I would prefer to just go to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood because it is something that I love very much compared to The Hateful Eight.
I've been looking forward to this, and I think post Inglourious Basterds, when he kind of has that turn, if we consider, I feel like everything like Django Unchained through to the upcoming Movie Critic is kind of late period Tarantino. Inglourious Basterds, Kill Bill through Inglourious Basterds is mid period, and then you have the early period, which is Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, and Jackie Brown. I don't know if that's 100% unfair breakdown of how I view his films, but out of his kind of late period stuff so far, this feels the most personal to me, and also it's probably my favorite of the 3. It's an amazing movie. I'm just gonna come out and say that before we start diving into the semantics of it. But I feel like I probably also have the most to say about it when compared to Django and Hateful Eight.
Absolutely, I'm with you 100%. I think, like I've said before, I mean, this movie has grown on me like crazy because I remember, I mean, we saw this movie together opening night, and I don't know if you remember, but leaving, I remember saying like, I think I liked it, and kind of being very lukewarm on it. And I went and saw it in theaters a second time. I saw it the first time we saw it. It was projected digitally, and the second time I saw it, it was on 35 millimeter. And I don't know what happened the second time. I think maybe it's just like I knew where the movie was going, or like I knew what it was kind of asking of me. Because the second time around, I really connected with it and have continued to grow with it as well. Like as more and more as I've watched it, I've seen it like 6 times now.
Right, I've seen it probably 4 or 5.
I think it's fantastic. In recent memory, this has been the Quentin Tarantino movie I have rewatched the most in like the last few years. um, I think it is, coming off of two very angry movies, especially the Hateful Eight being very like incredibly like objectively angry and bitter. This movie is surprisingly like very touching and very sentimental.
Right. And there is a
Not just
revenge
in the way of
aspect
like,
to it, but it's more of less revenge and more of romantic romantic revisionism.
yeah, it's very much in that vein of his revisionist style, but there's this almost like this old man filmmaker attitude where he just wants to spend time with these characters. I'll be honest, we kind of glossed over Leo in Django.
Yeah, I mean, we only
How do
mentioned him a couple
you
times.
how do you feel about Leonardo DiCaprio as an actor?
Uh, you know, much like Brad Pitt and Channing Tatum, he well, okay, less so than them. Uh, I think Leonardo DiCaprio started as a leading man because of his looks, and he was a little cardboard, and then he became a character actor later on, and I like that Leo. I don't mind his leading roles later on as he's become more of a diverse actor, but I definitely think he's a talent that's blossomed and he's honed his craft. He hasn't fully relied on his looks for 30 years. There's definitely an era of Leonardo DiCaprio that I feel like it was looks over substance. Not that I think Leonardo DiCaprio was ever particularly bad per se, but I definitely think it's funny that we keep comparing these people who were like they're too handsome to be character actors. Leonardo DiCaprio has consistently been a leading man, but he's a leading man and a character actor, and I think a lot of that's his own interest in the roles he picks. Like he agreed to be Rick Dalton. He agreed to be in The Revenant. He agrees to take these kind of crazy roles that challenge him rather than just well, we need a generic hunk for this movie, and Leo is a very good looking man, so let's grab him. So that's my opinion on Leo. Do I think he's a little lesser than Brad Pitt? Perhaps. Do I think he has more stinkers than Brad Pitt? Definitely. However, overall, I think especially as he's aged, and especially working with the right director, a la Martin Scorsese or Tarantino, he's done a very good job of transitioning into a strong actor, and I'm really excited to see what he does with Killers of the Flower Moon with not Tarantino, Scorsese later this year.
Yeah, I'm with you to an extent with everything you just said. Admittedly, I am not the biggest fan of Leo. I think
Even in later roles like this and Wolf of Wall Street and all that?
he's good in Wolf of Wall Street. I don't think he's bad at all.
Right.
I think he's fine. I think people really love to inflate his ability as an actor.
I agree. I'm not discrediting that. I mean,
we were seniors.
I think a lot of it is leaning on his looks. I mean, I hate to say it.
We were seniors in high school when The Revenant came out, and when
true.
he won his Oscar for it. And I remember distinctly people in school acting like this was this huge achievement for him.
Like it's finally time.
And I remember thinking, yeah, he was good in it. I don't know about if we're gonna give the Oscars any kind of validity. I don't think
I don't think
the best actor of the year.
I don't think there's been a year where I look at Leonardo DiCaprio and say This man has just put in the best performance of the 500 movies that have been released this year that qualify for Oscars based on its Oscars stupid ass criteria.
Sure.
Because there's probably 500 films that technically qualify for Oscars. I bet you I can find at least 5 performances that are better than Leonardo DiCaprio. Pretty easy. However, you have to factor in a couple things. Like, someone like Michael Caine could put in the best performance of his career, but dude's like 90. It's not glamorous for him to win best actor. You have to.
Anthony Hopkins just won, 2 years ago when everyone was pushing for the Chadwick Boseman
That's true.
push.
You're right. I kind of forgot about that, to be honest. So maybe
I
that's
think
unfair.
about it every day. I think about it every day because it's the funniest fucking thing that's ever happened at the Academy Awards.
Where poor Anthony Hopkins did. I never saw.
Talk about a shit show.
Yeah, but he.
I watch every year. I mean, I think it's fun. I love trying to guess what's gonna win. I'm not one of those fucking losers that starts doing this shit in June, because that's kind of lame. But when it comes to
there's no point in even starting until 2 weeks before, because every movie that's nominated or that's gonna win, except for the couple oddball choices or the rare out of nowhere film like Everything Everywhere All at Once. A lot of the times it is the Oscars picks out of November, fucking October through December. And then
it's a recency bias thing, and it's also, I mean, that's I have done a lot of reading about the Oscars and how it works and how it kind of affects the industry and popular culture. We could talk about that for another 3 hours, but I do want to get back to Hollywood, because everything I just said about Leo being kind of not my favorite actor, and I find him kind of annoying as an actor because he really leans into yelling when he needs to be big and emotional. He just resorts to yelling, and it kind of pisses me off because then people are like, "Wow, what a great actor," and I always find it very juvenile and annoying. But this is easily my favorite thing he's ever done because I fucking love him in this movie. He is such a treat to watch. This sad, pathetic, washed up actor who kind of has this Icarus moment where he is trying to fly, and get out of TV and move into movies, and it doesn't work out, and now he's just resorted to taking any part that he can get and just being pathetic, and Leo sells it so well as someone who has never had to face something like that.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, oh, he's really acting.
Yeah, no.
He is phenomenal in this movie. Phenomenal. I don't know if you know who was nominated for the Academy Awards in 2019. It was Leo. It was I want to say it was Jonathan Pryce in The Two Popes. It was Adam Driver in Marriage Story, and Antonio Banderas in Pain and Glory were all nominated, and they all lost to Joaquin Phoenix in Joker. And I think you and I both have some strong feelings on Joker, but I don't think it's out of the question to say that out of everything Joaquin Phoenix has been in, Joker might be the funniest movie to win an Oscar for, because it is not in my, it's nowhere close to one of my favorite performances of Joaquin Phoenix, who is one of my favorite contemporary actors. I love seeing him and stuff.
Him and Robert De Niro carry Joker on their back. Joker's a shitty movie that has a good performance from De Niro.
Strongest part of that movie.
Phoenix.
He is carrying that movie.
If I was to rank the Joaquin Phoenix and Robert De Niro performances, neither of those would break my top 10. Joker, I don't think Joker's a terrible movie. I do think it's either overhyped or overhated, depending who you talk to. For me, it falls in the middle where it's like, okay.
Yeah, I'm very conflicted with it.
I'm not even conflicted with it. For me, it's just okay. I have no desire to watch it because it neither does anything spectacular, and it doesn't do anything spectacularly dumb. It doesn't interest me. That's just kind of the point blank. Of it.
I find it very interesting. But that being said, like Joaquin Phoenix winning, if you would have told me like a year before that I was going to be kind of upset that Joaquin Phoenix won an Academy Award over Leonardo DiCaprio, I would have thought that you were fucking crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know if he was my favorite performance that year. I think that still goes to Adam Sandler in Uncut Gems, because he is such fun to watch in that movie. But Leo is definitely up there as one of my favorite performances of the year that year. He plays Rick Dalton as there's so much humanity to him. It is, he I've kind of just waxed poetically about him, about DiCaprio's performance. I mean, there's this really beautiful sadness to him that he's just so pathetic, and he's so insecure, that like you kind of can't help but root for him, and not because the movie's telling you, but because you see him in such a way where he feels so real and so human. He is such a treat to watch in this movie, and Brad Pitt's great as Cliff Booth. He is hilarious. I think this might also be my favorite thing, my favorite performance Brad Pitt's ever turned in, because he is so much fun to watch in this movie. He's charismatic as hell. He's got this wonderful kind of like dopiness to him, like this like kind of like ignorance is bliss kind of attitude, where he's just fine, kind of being a loser, and you know, he's just content. he doesn't let it get him down, and yeah, I love their dynamic is so awesome in this movie, and it's got this wonderful style and this like very romantic kind of view of a really niche time in, you know, American pop culture history, and it is this really wonderful like visual treat.
Yeah.
It is gorgeous to look at, and there's so much style and energy, and you know, not to shit on Fred Raskin for Django and Hateful Eight, which I do think really suffer from pacing issues. I think he really finds a wonderful sense of rhythm with this movie. It chugs on. I mean, this movie's 2 hours and 40 minutes, and it never gets dull for me. It never kind of pulls me out of it. When this movie ends, I kind of want it to just keep going.
No, I totally agree with you. I think it's such an engrossing world. They make a real fun world out of it. But also they just align you with characters that are so fun to hang out with, be it Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate, Rick Dalton, fuck, what's Brad Pitt's name? I've already said it 20 times in this video. Cliff.
Cliff Booth.
Yeah, I literally said it 20 times in this video. I just blanked on it. But they're so fun to hang out with, and they're such interesting personalities, and it's fun that everything kind of tangles together, but at the same time it feels like three distinct journeys, each one kind of going in its own direction. I guess I really want your take on what were your thoughts the first time you saw the kind of twist ending. Like, what do you think of the revisionist history that takes place? Because the first time I saw it, I was kind of put off by the revisionist history, but going back to it, I both respect it, but I also still to this day don't really know how to feel about it.
Yeah, I I have mixed feelings on it. Where part of me is like, if that part wasn't in the movie, this might be like what the fucking fifth 10 out of 10 Quentin Tarantino movie for me. Um, but on the other end, um, I mean, part of me doesn't care for it because up until that point, I am just really invested in the world that they've created and the 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 story surrounding these two characters, to where it comes off as very goofy that they just single handedly defeat the Manson family. On the other hand, um, I think it plays really well into Quentin Tarantino's almost like borderline obsession with revising history and like
Right.
changing history, because of this time that clearly was very important to him. And it the Manson family murders were kind of this signifying end of the 60s, where people always talk about how it was like, oh, it was the decade of peace and love, and so much progress was made, the civil rights movement, and we made it to the moon with the Apollo mission and
And
stuff.
yet
And
there was such a dark
people
side.
kind of
It
for
was kind
sure
of
they kind of
Hollywood's
forget.
version of, in a lot of ways, it was Hollywood's version of like the JFK or Martin Luther King assassination, where you have just this
Yeah, I
violent,
mean,
hideous crime
that's what I was
that's
going to point out. I
unfair
mean,
and unreal, and
yeah,
and I
JFK
think in a
was
way, what Tarantino is trying to set up is, he sets up a world where he raises the question, what if this time period in cinema, which, as we talked about, Quentin Tarantino loves to study the influence of cinema. What if this time period in cinema didn't have to end, which he sees the end of this era of cinema being Sharon Tate's death? How would that have changed the world? How much of a domino effect did Sharon Tate's wife actually have on, or I don't know why I said Sharon Tate's wife, Sharon Tate's death have on the history of Hollywood, and as a result, the history of the world? And I think that's kind of interesting to ponder. And I think where Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has its glum moments and kind of depressing moments, much like Django, it kind of wants to have a happy revisionist ending. Like I said with Django, realistically, Django would have an incredibly hard life after Django Unchained, but he rides off into the sunset, and we as an audience, and perhaps
this
Quentin
storybook
Tarantino
ending.
aligned it to be this storybook ending, where here we almost have Sharon Tate and Rick Dalton and Cliff riding off into the sunset as well, and you almost gotta wonder. You almost gotta wonder, like, reality unfortunately isn't as perfect as the world Tarantino sets up. And I think that's almost a theme of his, is this idealistic theme. The people who deserve punishment get their just desserts, at least in the later part of his career, because obviously something like Pulp Fiction is more nihilistic. But he almost has this optimistic view that comes from early or later Tarantino is a lot more optimistic than the perhaps more realistic early Tarantino, which I think is
Yeah, I
interesting.
mean, well,
I think it's a big change from early in his career.
yeah, examining like his early period. I mean, Reservoir Dogs, Jackie Brown, those both have pretty. I mean, one was very dark ending, but the other one is very melancholic, despite the heroes kind of getting away and having their. I mean, Jackie Brown finally has a real shot at not being stuck or beaten down by everything around her and in her choices and whatnot. But there's this very like melancholic, tinge to that ending, And the Hateful Eight has this really brutal, just again very bitter, mean spirited, angry ending. Um, whereas like, I mean, and then aside from that, I mean, Kill Bill just like a happy ending. Um, Inglourious Basterds, Death Proof, and Django have very satisfying endings where it's just like, there's this kind of cathartic sense of like the really shitty people get their comeuppance, and it's like, we're reveling in that victory. Whereas this has a very just quiet, very like beautiful, like kind of romantic ending, ending a storybook, that is kind of like really, really touching, and
Right.
something that I think Tarantino doesn't get a lot of credit for, because as we've kind of discussed, I mean, a lot of his movies have this really beautiful like sincerity to them, and this really kind of revels in that sincerity, which is really nice. Like it's just a really satisfying ending. And it really is. I feel like it is Quentin like reflecting on the '60s were a very tumultuous time, despite being very nostalgic. Like people have this weird nostalgia for it because they just remember the good and don't remember all these horrible things where we had these huge figures in terms of civil rights, and like our country's leaders being murdered in broad daylight, just being assassinated,
I
and
mean,
and I mean,
it's interesting.
we
It's
got into
such
Vietnam.
it's definitely this level of contradiction to the '60s that I don't think many other decades have, which I think Tarantino's very aware about and plays into quite a bit.
For sure.
You know what this
Absolutely.
movie reminds me of a lot? The movie Driller Killer. Anyways,
I'm not familiar with
the
it.
movie Driller Killer. Anyways,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
anyways, um, yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting. I don't know, like, I definitely think it's a turn for Tarantino, and in a way, it also I have a question for you. Do you think kind of the fact that Harvey Weinstein isn't involved with this movie affects it at all? I don't see much of an effect. I don't know why I asked that question. I
Yeah.
just
I don't really see his influence on these movies. Given the fact that he was mostly just like a money guy, would help finance, and obviously had a role to play in pre-production. Um, but I mean, he was famous for, I guess infamous really for like being pretty brutal to cast and crew, and filmmakers, and kind of would strong arm people into cutting scenes, and cutting the runtime down. And I mean, that's something that has never really been Quentin's style. I mean, Reservoir
I
Dogs
don't think
is
he ever needed.
90 minutes,
I don't think he ever
and that's
bothered
it.
really touching Quentin's films. I guess it is worth noting. I believe Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's his longest film, if you don't kind of count Kill Bill as a duology, and if you don't count the Hateful Eight Netflix cut. So I do think he kind of has more freedom at this point to create a longer film. And even so, you
I
look at the Hateful Eight, which is
yeah,
also an incredibly long film.
I think The Hateful Eight is his longest film. It's like just shy of 2 hours and 50 minutes, and also Django Unchained is 2 hours 45, like on the dot. Um, but still, those two movies, again, being Weinstein backed, I'm almost like, I don't know if maybe that allows him to have this sentimental attitude, or like more open to being sentimental.
Yeah.
But I don't think it really slows him down in the way that like not having Sally Menke and Lawrence Bender working with him, um, in terms of pre and post production, kind of did. Where their absence, I do think, is felt.
Okay, my next question is really we talked about kind of late period Tarantino. Um I think in a lot of ways this is probably one of the most sexualized Quentin Tarantino films since like Death Proof. Like Hateful Eight, Django, and Inglourious Basterds were kind of not particularly sexualized films. Where I think Death Proof and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is kind of peaks on those points. Do you have any comments
Absolutely.
on that at all?
I think aside from Death Proof, this is very much his horniest movie.
I mean,
Um,
he definitely he definitely has an admiration for the females in his movie, but I also think it's worth noting that perhaps that kind of fits into the movie's themes, given given the time in Hollywood. And I mean, Hollywood's always kind of a place that's very much on the sexual forefront, but I actually think it's kind of worth noting that this movie in particular, you watch it and it's Tarantino at peak horniness.
100%. And I don't know if it was just kind of him him trying to just uh, get some kind of relief from the lack of that in
Yeah.
his previous films, but it's definitely there, which is interesting to say the least.
Yeah. Um, I would say his the four movies that feel the most in that vein is Pulp Fiction, Jackie Brown, Death Proof especially, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood especially. And I was curious I was kind of surprised to see those themes return. Even seeing it for the first time in theaters in 2019, I'm like, damn, Quentin, what's going on with you? Um,
I distinctly remember a certain point in the movie when Cliff picks up one of the Manson girls, Margaret Qualley, and she, kicks her feet up on the windshield, and I remember distinctly groaning, and you,
yeah, it's a little
you
creepy.
leaning over and saying, Quentin's getting like something along the lines of like Quentin's getting reckless with this one. And I think that was before Margot Robbie took off her shoes. So,
Yeah, because Margot Robbie
we
does
didn't
it
know what
right
we
in
were
the
in
film.
for. Yeah, we didn't know
Yeah,
what we were in
no,
for.
Quentin gets particularly reckless, and again, I mean, we don't have to revisit the tired feet conversation, but in a lot of ways, it's Quentin's version of the female breasts. But you can tell when that's one thing I almost take away from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because it has more of an Andy Sedaris feel. Yeah, like at times you feel like, why is this old pervert showing us what we're seeing right now? You know, and I hate to say that, but sometimes Once Upon a Time in Hollywood does come that way, and
Yeah.
and I kind of understand it. It's 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 he's trying to make a comment on this time in Hollywood, but it's just kind of it comes off slightly uncomfortable, especially with Quentin's fetishized view of women at times,
For sure. Yeah.
or his
That
particular
doesn't really work
fetish.
for me.
I think for
It's
the most
never
part the
really
movie
worked for me.
shines through.
Um,
I genuinely think it's a great movie, but that is one criticism I have.
Absolutely.
Where it's almost like, especially after the last few, where Tarantino feels like he matures into more of a I guess it just feels like he matures past the young filmmaker aspect. Like by Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it comes off a little more creepy old man than genuinely like young, energetic filmmaker vibe.
Yeah, yeah. I do want to take a moment to give a highlight or almost like a small, not a round of applause, but a respectful nod for Quentin making a movie set in the 1960s and not featuring any uses of the N-word.
Yeah,
Because
that was
that
sort of
shows some
surprising.
serious. I don't know about you, but when I found out that the movie was going to be taking place in the 60s, I was like, oh no.
Right. Well, I mean,
After the controversy surrounding Django and the Hateful Eight, I was like, oh no, he's
okay.
he's gonna go for it.
I'll rationalize it. If this was a general movie in America in the 60s, he would have used the N-word like it was nobody's fucking business. However, based on the fact that it is more based on a fluffy Hollywood surrounded by white people, do I think if this movie was made basically word for word, shot for shot in the Pulp Fiction era, there would be N-words? Yeah, of course. Tarantino probably would have wrote himself in to say them. But I think as a more mature individual, Quentin Tarantino also found out that there wasn't really room for it. Like in The Hateful Eight, less so, but Django especially almost wouldn't work without that racist element. You have the naive Django going up against the world, and specifically a bunch of racists, and so it really works for me. Maybe not really works for me, but it's understandable. To try to shoehorn Quentin Tarantino's perhaps whitest movie of all time, and then shoehorn in a bunch of N-words, you could definitely question the motivation behind his use of the N-word a hell of a lot more. That's my interpretation.
I don't know if I totally agree with I guess we kind of dodged it when talking about the previous two movies. I don't think it necessarily needs to be there in order to have a critical view of like life at that time. I think if you took it out, you would not really be missing anything.
Okay, maybe in The Hateful Eight, I can agree with your sentiment, but
I understand.
you have Leonardo DiCaprio as almost evil supervillain slave owner. Like if he's not dropping the N-word in Django, like I mean, we're supposed to hate this guy. We're supposed to think like this guy's a fucking asshole.
It is almost to a
black people.
Cartoonish degree.
No, for sure.
I mean, the fact that
Django Unchained is his cartooniest movie.
I think it just it wouldn't really lose any of the punch in terms of the attitude towards race in those movies if it wasn't in there.
That's true.
Yeah, like because I think subtextually there is enough there. It's not like the use of it ruins the movie for me, either of them. I think it shows, like, I know he's been dismissive of the critics for his use of violence, but to me, I think it shows kind of a hopefully a movement of growth for not being so dependent on using that kind of word in order to get a point across.
Right. And I think I would agree with your argument a lot more if he tried to use it in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Absolutely.
I think Django Unchained and Hateful Eight, I can kind of rationalize it. Pulp Fiction, I don't so much. I almost feel like if he didn't have a history of it and it was more of a thing in like Django and Hateful Eight to try to add a punch, I would feel a little less critical of it. But I think we're having this conversation a lot because in his past he was a little dodgy about his use of it. Writing himself in as a character saying the N-word 5 times is a
He's
bad
very
look,
dismissive.
especially in modern day. And then to later on go on and use it and say, well, it's integral to the movie, definitely brings up more questions. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt in Django and Hateful Eight, especially because I think how it was used mostly works. But I also understand at the same time, I think it's entirely fair and definitely deserved to question the use of it, given his history in like Pulp Fiction, for example, where it adds nothing to the movie. He just does it to do it. Perhaps that's an edge factor, or perhaps it was a misguided attempt at humor. I don't entirely know what his goal was in his early movies when he was using it. Where I can at least slightly rationalize his mindset behind the Hateful Eight and Django. Perhaps he could use it punchier. I hate to use that word, but like maybe Candy just uses it like once in Django as an exhaustive point, but then he uses it 20,000 times, and every character uses it 1,000 times. Even at times where it doesn't feel entirely necessary to the story, and especially with his history, you got to question. I like I said in the first episode, I don't think Quentin Tarantino's a racist, but I definitely think his use of that word is questionable. I think Absolutely. It's entirely fair to question Quentin Tarantino on this matter, and I think it's 100% deserved to ask questions and kind of ponder, well, was it necessary here? Was it necessary there? I mean, we're also looking at a white filmmaker who's gonna inevitably make millions of dollars off of his movie where he uses the N-word several times. So to question it is entirely fair. I don't think we 100% agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. I'm glad.
I think we're in the same ballpark. I think we're in the same ballpark. I think we're not necessarily on the same base, but I think we're more inclined to agree than disagree on that.
Right. I think there's a pretty solid understanding of middle ground. And I definitely I don't think either of us are off the same page when it comes to the fact that in Pulp Fiction it was 100% unnecessary, and I am more inclined to believe it was Quentin Tarantino being an edgelord over a flat-out racist at the time. But I think evidence kind of leads me to believe that it was more of an edgelord thing. Perhaps a lack of education and partially at the time. And based on the fact that he kind of had a history with that, it makes his usage of it in in Django and Hateful Eight a lot more questionable.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
With that said, I mean, I could keep talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood all day. I think it's definitely worth it. Do you have a ranking for the Quentin Tarantino movies for me, or how do these stack up for you? Or did you want to? Because I think I'm just gonna go down the list and rate them because I'm too lazy to make a list. So I think what I'm gonna do is go down the list and rate each movie.
Okay.
And then if somebody feels like making a list out of it, they're welcome to. Do you want to go first or should I?
Hey, it's your show. Why don't you go first?
All right. Reservoir Dogs, 4 out of 10. Great premiere effort.
4 out of
4 out of 5. 4 out of 5. I'm going out of 5. 4 out of 10 would be I rave about it on the first episode. 4 out of 10. 4 out of 5. A very strong opening effort. I don't think it's particularly something that had to have been made by Quentin. I think someone else could have pulled it off. I think he still needed a boost of confidence, which leads me to Pulp Fiction, which I give 5 out of 5 to. Similarly, I think he adds a lot of confidence. It feels a lot more like it had to be a Quentin Tarantino film. I don't think someone else could have made Pulp Fiction. Jackie Brown, 4.5 out of 10. Reintroduces Pam Grier, has a lot of strong character moments, and I think it's overlooked, as far overlooked as a Quentin Tarantino movie can be, at least. Kill Bill 1 and 2, I'm just going to rate them together. Probably a 4. I'm such a big fan of martial arts and samurai movies that, well, I think it did a lot with the characters that I think is really good. It just, I don't know. For some reason, revisiting that genre from Quentin Tarantino's lens just never did it for me. But you still gotta admire the character work and stuff. So at the same time, I really like those movies. So 4 out of 10, or 4 out of 5. Maybe on rewatch it'll be a 5 out of 5. I gotta rewatch those because it's been like 2 or 3 years, and I feel like I've grown more accustomed to the samurai and martial arts genres, which I don't know if that'll help my enjoyment or hinder, but I'm curious to rewatch. Death Proof 3.5. It's a little messy for Quentin Tarantino, but it's really good. Inglourious Basterds 4.5. I really like this movie. I think he has a lot to say about cinema. I think the performances are great. I also think Tarantino in a World War II spaghetti World War II flick, that's kind of fun. Django Unchained, this is gonna be controversial. 5 out of 5. It's not my favorite Tarantino movie, but I think it does exactly what it does. I love spaghetti westerns, I love American westerns, and I love pop cinema. And I think it does all three so well that it does exactly what Tarantino set out to do. And it's a mixture of a lot of things I love. So even though I don't think it's the deepest, and I still rank it probably 3rd or 4th on my Tarantino list, and probably from a technical standpoint, like 7th on my Tarantino list, I still have to give it a 5 out of 5 because that movie personally means a lot to me. Hateful Eight is another 3.5 for me. Very interesting. There's a lot of it's insightful, but like we were saying in our larger conversation, it just doesn't feel like a movie that needed to be a movie. It should have been a novel or a play. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I bounce between a 4.5 and a 5. I think today I'm going to give it a 5 just to be epic. So what's your rating?
I know I kind of did them as well as we were going along, but just to reiterate, Reservoir Dogs is a 9 out of 10. I think it's a really expertly crafted film. I think it's kind of shocking that it's a debut feature. With an asterisk next to that. But it is surprisingly very confident and very fully realized something that clearly has a very distinct vision and style that was executed really well. I think it's a great, perfect first film to start off. Pulp Fiction, I'm going to be boring and give it a 10 out of 10. It is timeless. It's iconic. It is kind of in its own lane where there are a lot of movies since it's been made that owe a lot to it, but nothing has been able to replicate it in the same style. And it's just so refreshing to see something so fresh and distinct that is also kind of universally loved and appreciated and still stands the test of time. I mean, that movie's 30 years old and it still is just as electric as it. I'm guessing people were reacting to it in the 90s when it came out. Jackie Brown, 8 out of 10. I think it is really, really wonderful. It's a really well-told story that has some really, really terrific characters filled, and one of my favorite performances in any movie ever. It definitely has a special place in my heart. Whereas, like, even though I might not rank it as high as the previous two, I think it's still has a lot to offer in a very different aspect. Kill Bill, I'm viewing it as one film. It's 10 out of 10 for me. I think from a technical standpoint and from a just presentation, it is easily the best thing he's done. It is ambitious. It is energetic. It's electric. I've watched it twice this year so far. I could watch it again immediately. Death Proof, I'm a 7 out of 10. Still really good. Not quite great. But there is still like a lot to love about this movie. There's clearly a lot of heart and a lot of effort that went into it. And I think that translates on screen really, really well in a very beautiful way. Inglourious Basterds, 10 out of 10. Like Kill Bill, I could watch this tomorrow. Like I could watch this right now. And would be locked in. I think it is. I think it's going to continue to be kind of seen as one of the high points. I think it is I think it's the most entertaining. I think it's the most interesting for sure. Because I think he really has a lot to say without spelling it out, because he really does trust the audience to absorb what he's saying. Django Unchained, 9 out of 10. I think it is. It's a blast. It's a 2-hour, 45-minute cartoon that, albeit, even though I have a ton of problems with it, I still am just like locked in, and I have a blast with it, and it is very satisfying to watch a bunch of racist pieces of shit get torn through, and just have just buckets of blood like kind of just exploding everywhere. Hateful Eight, 7 out of 10. Again, kind of like a movie that it's a movie I appreciate more than I enjoy. I think out of all of them, it is very much a movie that, if you were to have it in a different medium, I think it would almost be better. Whereas the rest of his work really does shine as a film. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, 9 out of 10. I think it's the most tender, most sincere, most touching film he's ever made. It's clearly very personal, and it is really nice to see that side of someone shown on screen. I think it's very wonderful.
I agree. That's a good list. I guess just before we wrap up, what do you think of the Movie Critic? What do you have any hopes for supposedly Quentin Tarantino's last film? What do you want to see? Do you think there's any specific room for growth you're looking for, or are you just excited to kind of see what our potential last ride, at least cinematically, with Quentin is going to be?
I haven't paid a lot of attention to it. I wanna go in. I know I'm going to see it because, like we've said before, I think we've both said that isn't necessarily one of our favorite filmmakers, but clearly he's made a lot of stuff that we really love.
He's definitely made an impact on both of us.
Yeah,
even
and
if we wouldn't really consider him a favorite, or
yeah.
I don't think he's as challenging as a lot of my favorite filmmakers, even though I think there's a lot of depth to a lot of his films. Like, I definitely think he's a great filmmaker. I think that's fair to say, at least in his own way.
Yeah. And I think it's I think it's very rare to have a filmmaker have as much pull and clout and as he does. to where his movies, especially now, I mean, everything has to be a franchise where he has kind of very much stuck to creating original movies that have a ton of personality and style to them.
What I respect most is that
it's
he sticks to it. He has influences, but he sticks to his own ideas.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think it's kind of like um, he is is kind of one of those filmmakers that kind of like a Steven Spielberg or a Martin Scorsese that has a very distinct style and um, catalog that I'm very happy that it exists. And I know life is it's not permanent, and at some point those people won't be around to make this these kinds of films that are very unique and very personal and can have that kind of pull. And so while they are still here putting out new stuff, I'm going to be there to support it and to experience it, because there's going to be a day where that's not going to be the case, where it's not going to be something that I'm looking forward to. And so I'm gonna take my time and enjoy it while I can.
I think that's awesome. I think that was pretty much the Grant and Connor's Power Hour Volume 10. Grant will be on soon with new topics. We might talk about another director. We'll figure something out to talk about. I would love to do a Kubrick episode. Maybe do another two-parter similar to this, because I could talk about pretty much all of Kubrick's movies all day. So I'd love to do like Kubrick or someone like that. But we'll come back to it soon, and we'll have Grant on pretty shortly here, and we'll do it up with another filmmaker. Grant, do you have anything to say before we wrap up?
No, not much. Just I don't know. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. We'll definitely have you on again. These were a fun couple episodes to do, and I would love to do something similar in a couple weeks with a different filmmaker, perhaps, or we could do something more basic, a little less homework driven than something as large. But we'll figure something out, and we'll see you guys next time.